Hello, everybody, and welcome to our August Lunch and Learn. Thank you for being so patient as we reschedule this Lunch and Learn from July. We have all things on deck and technical difficulties overcome. We are here to talk about kinship caregivers and the Office of Mental Health today. I'm joined by Jon S at OMH. I'm going to give a quick overview of the Kinship Navigator, our Lunch and Learn series, and then I'm going to turn it right over to Jon to talk about kinship caregivers and mental health. My name is Rae Glaser. I am the director of the New York State Kinship Navigator program. We host these monthly Lunch and Learn webinars, 30 minutes. This month is an hour due to the importance of the topic. And they are the third Thursday of every month. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to get us started. And if you have any questions or would like to say hello in the chat, feel free. If we have time at the end of the webinar, we will disable the mute button and allow folks to jump in and ask questions. As always, these recordings, these webinars are recorded, so it will be available on the Kinship Navigator YouTube page and website for you, as well as all the materials from today's presentation. Next slide. So just a little bit about our Lunch and Learn series. As you can see here, we've got some of our past Lunch and Learns that we've had through the months. We've worked with family court, social workers, school administrators, Cornell cooperatives, among just a few of the agencies. If you are an agency that's interested in presenting on one of our Lunch and Learns, please feel free to get in contact with me directly. Next month, we will be foregoing our monthly Lunch and Learn to tune in for our Kinship Care Month celebration, which is on September 22nd at 11 a.m. on the Navigator homepage. We have our registration. Please feel free to register and join us for our annual celebration of kinship families and professionals. Next slide. So as I said, I'm Rae Glaser. I'm the director of New York State Kinship Navigator. I'm going to give just a very brief overview of the Navigator's programming for anybody that's not familiar already. Next slide. The Navigator is information, referral, and education for kinship caregivers, professionals, prospective kinship caregivers all across New York State. We provide connections to financial assistance, legal advocacy, legal rights. We work with local kinship programs in the system of care, the Department of Social Services, and we provide services to caregivers via our toll-free helpline. Our number's right there, 877-454-6463. We're available Monday through Friday, 10 to 4. We also have a website, which is on our next slide, www.nysnavigator.org. I think I spoke too fast. That might be the slide after that, but that's all right. We're information, referral, education. So we provide basic kinship information to families across New York State as to what resources are available to them in terms of financial assistance, legal options, enrolling children into school, obtaining documentation, common facets of kinship caregiving. We also provide referrals to the local kinship programs, case management programs, permanency resource centers, other local kinship services, legal referrals, things of that nature. We provide statewide presentations to different organizations across the state, lunch and learns such as these every month to different kinship caregivers and professionals. We have an online video archive for caregivers, as well as cited legal fact sheets on different facets of kinship care so that you can find out information. And we also provide advocacy, both in terms of one-on-one case advocacy and statewide advocacy in the form of our Kin Care Coalition, which is a group of stakeholders, including the kinship programs, the Navigator, and anybody else that has an interest in kinship care. The coalition meets monthly on the third Tuesday of every month. Myself and Deb Fox, who works for the Family Enrichment Network, co-chair the coalition. If you're interested in it, please feel free to email me and we'll get you connected. Next slide. Here's just a brief snapshot of our website, and we're moving right along to virtual case management. There's our website, www.nysnavigator.org. Just a quick pictorial so that you can see what it looks like. You've got there your legal fact sheets. You've got a map of New York State where you can click on your county, find what resources are available in your county, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, an online chat feature so you can speak with a Kinship Navigator over the computer if you would prefer to do so rather than the phone. Next slide. Last thing I'm going to talk about is just one of our newer offerings for the Kinship Navigator program, which is virtual case management. We service all 62 counties in New York State via information, referral, and education. Our virtual case management takes that a little bit further, and we are available in 21 counties where there is no current local kinship program to provide virtual case management for caregivers. If you're a caregiver in one of those counties, or you want to refer a caregiver in one of those counties, you don't need to do anything special. Just have them call our helpline or send them via permission to contact form, and we will enroll them in virtual case management, where a case manager will stay with the kinship caregiving family for up to 6 months to help them with benefits application, facilitated referrals, help them understand all of their legal rights, and we extensively follow up with the families on a regular basis just to make sure that they're feeling supported. The counties that we represent are right on the slide. If you have any questions about that, feel free to connect with us directly. Next slide. And the last thing that I have to talk about for you is our permission to contact form. Many of you are very aware of it. Here's a link to it. This is just another way to get in touch with the navigator. If you have a family that may or may not call us, if you give them our phone number, the permission to contact form is acting as a release form for you to have the client sign, fax it over to us, and we will reach out to the caregiver directly. We reach out within 48 hours, usually within the first 24 hours, and we make 3 attempts to reach that caregiver. And if there's we're unable to contact them, we send them a letter in the mail, giving them information on the services. And it's just one way to take the onus off of these families that are going through quite a bit for having the navigator reach out directly. Again, if you have questions, feel free to connect with us. You can download that right on our homepage, or we can send them out to your agency. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jon S from OMH to talk to us a little bit about restorative practice during these tough times that we're going through. Jon, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Rae. And I just want to commend the services that you offer and your team offers to families who are stepping into that role of caregiving after they may have already been parenting or just stepping into this for the first time. So it's so key. And thanks to New York State too for funding this and all the services. I also want to say that when we first started connecting about a year ago, and Karu, do I say her name right, Rae?
Korea. Yes.
Kari, when we were doing some listening circles, we heard from families how valuable Kari is to their life and their caregiving. So I just wanted to put a word out to say that direct connection with families is so important. And in addition to Rae and others, Kari really provides a valuable service, and it's so expansive in terms of the number of counties that you serve and families. So
that's fantastic. Thank you. Kari is such a valuable member of our team, and she's actually on the webinar today. So shout out to Kari. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Appreciate it.
And so we have, as Rae mentioned, some technical challenges last time. So in between last time and this moment, Kari and I have actually been studying for our PhD in Zoom technology. And so this is kind of our final exam today. So we hope we'll pass. So
all right.
Thank you for everyone's patience. So it's so great to be with you and looking at the number of participants and the various agencies that you represent, including someone from Virginia that signed up today. It's just such a wonderful opportunity for me as part of New York State Office of Mental Health to share about restorative practice. I've been a clinician for over 30 years, working primarily with trauma, families, individuals, people who've committed crimes, offenses, as well as those who've been survivors of that. And about 20 plus years ago, I learned about restorative justice, kind of an earlier term. Restorative practice is kind of more of an umbrella term that incorporates the justice aspect and the use in schools for conduct issues. And in the last year and a half, I've been so thankful at the Office of Mental Health to have this work recognized by our commissioner, by who's Dr. Ann Sullivan, to our just retired Associate Commissioner of Children's Services, Donna Bradbury, who took over a new department called the Office of Prevention and Health Initiatives, which I'm now a part of. And we're looking at things like social determinants of health and the things that undergird support for positive mental health. And also my supervisor, Bonnie Catlin, who all of whom support this work. And I'm so thankful to be able to do this and combine my learning from so many different people, world experts in clinical work and in doing this kind of work around the world, bringing proactive approaches to development, as well as conflict resolution, harm reduction, harm healing processes. So I term this as practice first to support ourselves and then others, because none of the interventions that are carried out in human services are done through a machine alone. We are the instrument. So we have to be tuned as best we possibly can to be there for others, to recognize what's going on in ourselves, and then to mutually support ourselves and others during turbulent times, as well as during more peaceful times, which I know we all hope for. So I wanted to start out by saying that this is also about first taking care of ourselves, as I mentioned, including during this time together. This is personal. This is personal to me. I have 2 kids, and I want them to grow up in a different way than I grew up in some ways. And that is to be rid of bullying, to be rid of people clamping down and not giving us space to be who we are. And so as part of that, we may touch on some things that activate feelings for you about your own life and your own way of being in the world and the way that you've been treated. So first and foremost, just to acknowledge that and to say that if you need to step away, if you need to tune out for a bit, that all that's welcome, whatever you need to do during this time. And again, thank you for opening yourselves up both in time and space to be here and to listen and contribute. So the purpose today is to share a bit about these practices. And also it's an invitation. And that is that because I'm with the Office of Mental Health, I can share about these practices with Office of Mental Health licensed providers, school systems, other programs, whole agencies that want to move in this direction. So I'm available, no charge, and I'll have my contact information at the end. So we'll talk a bit about imposed change and some antidotes to that. And then we'll get into a little bit more about this paradigm that's called restorative practice. And then have some time for conversation, both in the chat, which Rae will be looking at, as well as hopefully some time at the end for some questions and comments.
I should interject here, John. I apologize.
Sure.
It appears that the chat is disabled right now
Okay.
due to our technical difficulties last month. I'm not going to undisable it at this point in time, but at
Sure.
the end, when we're taking conversation, we'll open up the chat. We'll open it up for conversation. So everybody on the line, thank you for being patient with us. We just want this to go really well, and then we'll mess with technology at the end. Back over to you, John.
Yes. And ideally, we would be doing this in person, because restorative practice, as a friend at OMH, Lorraine Washington, says, is needed wherever there are relationships. And we know relationships are so important to our lives. And ideally, we'd be engaging in conversation, face-to-face connection. This is because of this pandemic and so on, this is the best we can do. The hope is to be able to do this more together and make this as conversational as possible, even in this forum. So right now, what I'm aiming for in terms of this overall restorative work is to do this across the lifespan. And that ranges from as early as preschool, parental caregiver relationships with younger kids through schools, all the way through higher education. And I've been connecting with this state university system around reaching out to SUNY schools and providing both support as they go through their education, as well as shaping the next generation, all the way through aging services. So you probably have heard the phrase, everything happens for a reason. Well, actually, I think everything happens for many, many reasons. And so in looking at any complex issue, whether it's a family issue, whether it's these horrible, tragic shootings in our communities, whether it's the tensions that occur at a school board meeting, these are all interconnected issues. And it starts with looking inside at the intrapersonal, and then extends out to each other. And then it builds there to gatherings of people in organizations and communities. And those thoughts and beliefs that we carry and experiences, they influence public policy. And then back down through public policy influences community organizations all the way down to our intrapersonal level. So this is complex. So I'm going to use this word impose change, and I'll describe that in just a moment. First, Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a noted child psychiatrist, says, we think about this in terms of the COVID situation, as well as other disasters, which we have going around the world, that the most traumatic aspects of all disasters involve the shattering of human connections. That's especially true for children. And we know all about these disconnections, whether it's mask wearing that disconnects our multiple muscles and facial expressions, to loss, death of family members due to COVID. It's natural disasters of a hurricane that dislocates someone from their home. So those disconnections come about because of what's called imposed change. Patricia Fennell, who's an international scholar, writes about this. And she says that imposed change, and in my words, change we could do without, thank you very much, involve those life-changing experiences that we don't want to have in our lives. COVID example, family divorce, drug use, mental health issues, foster care, anything that disrupts kind of our connection and our flow in life is something that's imposed upon us. And it can lead to that kind of disconnection. And she writes about this in a couple of books where she talks about understanding from a story or a narrative perspective how people progress from those imposed changes through a crisis phase to stabilizing, and then with support, a resolution phase, dealing with the emotional heavy lifting, which I think we're probably going to see more of as we move out of the COVID crisis phase and stabilizing into what she calls integration, which is living with. So it's living with divorce. It's living with that physical ailment that might have come about because of a disease condition. So I just wanted to note that as a helpful narrative. So disconnection is at the root of so much harm, so that the members of the Navajo Nation, when they try to explain why people harm others, they say that the person who does harm acts as if they have no relatives. It's easy to hurt someone when we're not connected to them because we don't see them as a full human being. And we are social creatures. And so we also look for others of like kind so that people do seek out relatives. And unfortunately, when social norms are involved and others have been disconnected, that's when I think we see the formation of gangs, or we see extremists who aren't part of more connected pro-social communities finding those who embrace those kind of views. And then we wind up sadly, with these kind of tragedies that we've been seeing lately. So let's talk about connection. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a New York Times bestselling author and expert, he has written the book, The Body Keeps the Score, around trauma. He says being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. So we go from changes imposed upon us, the disruption, the disconnections, to saying how important those connections are to our mental health. I want to live in a safe world, as we all do. I want to live in a place and work in a place and be part of a community that supports those kind of connections and safety. Restorative practice is a means toward that connection. Restorative practice is a way of thinking and being. It's not necessarily a program or a new initiative. The International Institute for Restorative Practices says that this is not something new on the plate. It is the plate, because everything happens around relationships. So this definition speaks to that. It's a way of thinking and being focused on creating safe spaces for real conversations that deepen relationships and build stronger, more connected communities. Now, I hope today that you'll go away from our time together with some practical skills and applications, and some, maybe more importantly, is just kind of a thinking process to understand that these ways of being, which you all do already, maybe we're putting some new names to things and some more explicit frameworks. But my guess is we can all align around this, that we all want to have these safe spaces. Where it starts, again, is the intrapersonal level, and that requires doing a U-turn, which is to come back inside us first. And I think one example of this U-turn and looking inside relates to Walt Whitman's poem, where he says, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I'm large, I contain multitudes." And to the right of that phrase is a clip from the movie Inside Out by Pixar Films. And Rae's going to just show about a 2-minute clip of this. And I'd like you to just see what comes up for you. If you can identify with any of these different characters that might be part of your makeup. And then we'll come back. Rae, I'm going to invite you to be.
Yeah. Okay, and we're going to rely back on Jon now to make sure that we can see this. Jon, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Oh, Riley, how was the first day of school? Fine, I guess. Did you guys pick up on that? Sure did. Something's wrong. Signal the husband.
She's looking at us. What did she say? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening. Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What is it, woman? What?
I'm joy. This is sadness. That's anger. What? This is disgust. And that's fear. We're Riley's emotions. These are Riley's memories. They're mostly happy, you'll notice, not to brag. Can Miranda maybe hold you? What happened? Sadness? She did something to the memory. Is everything okay? I don't know.
Take it back, Joy!
Great, Joy. No, please.
More memories! Can I say that curse word now?
What do we do now?
Nothing's working. Why isn't it working? I wish Joy was here.
We can fix this. Just have to get back to headquarters. That's long-term memory. You can get lost in there. Okay. I'm positive you will get lost in there. What was that?
Was it there?
There were no bears in San Francisco.
I saw a really hairy guy. You look like a bear.
This place is huge. Imagination land? No way. Dream Productions. Rainbow Unicorn. It's right there. I loved you in Fairy Dream Adventure Part 7. Okay, bye. I love you. We can't focus on what's going wrong. There's always a way to turn things around.
everyone pizza. Who's the birthday girl?
All right, turning it back over to you, John.
Okay. Can you see my screen, Ray?
I cannot see you. I can see you, I can't see your screen.
Okay. I think. Let me share my screen again.
All right, there we go.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. So that is called a major emotion picture. And I want to ask folks, since we're not in the chat, just to write down even some things that come up for you, things that you might identify as parts of yourself when you listen to that. Does anybody have an experience of protecting themselves by, sorry, there's somebody outside the window who is chopping a tree down. Any experience of anger, any experience ever of vulnerability, of sadness, of jealousy, any of those things that you might have seen in the movie clip, and just to write those down and to also just to kind of reflect on what's on top for you all as you are out supporting families who may be economically stressed, maybe stressed around relationships, the environment they're living in, the lack of opportunity that's been imposed because of other policies. I'm thinking of housing and redlining that has limited people's ability to gain wealth, generational wealth. And just to kind of be aware of that. We'll come back to that if people want to share some things both together today or even with myself or Ray at a later point. So this is the basic restorative paradigm, and I call it self-led, and you'll see just a moment why I do that. So in the restorative paradigm, the hypothesis is that we are more cooperative, more productive, happier when those in authority do things with us rather than to us or for us or ignore us. And that paradigm is applicable to our inner world. It's applicable to our relationships with others. It's applicable to how systems relate to us. So that when we have high expectations of others and we're low on support, that's seen as the punitive approach. As a friend of mine, John Kutros, says, it's the trail 'em, nail 'em, jail 'em approach. This is my way or the highway. If we're low on expectation and we're low on support, that might be when we're kind of giving up and we've said, we've done all we can. I don't know what else to do. In the negative aspect, this is seen as a neglectful. Underneath that, I think, is more of a protective stance that is feeling hopeless. When we are in a position where we have low expectations, although we're high on that degree of care and nurture, we might be seen doing things for others. And I'm reminded of a man in a social work graduate school class who talked about doing more for his child or children, probably out of a sense of guilt. So when others have been through so much and we say, gosh, I don't want to put anything more on them. I think that I better do this for them. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't always respect the dignity of the other. And so what we strive for, and this is all aspirational because I can tell you examples in each of these quadrants, or I've acted punitively, I've acted in a way that was giving up, I've acted in a way that was permissive and had those parts come up. So when we say this is aspirational, we're saying this is the goal, is to do things with others. And that is the restorative framework in a nutshell. And this word self comes up. So many years ago, I heard a speaker. I was in my last week of working at St. Anne Institute after 13 years there. And every year we would have, many years, we would have a very famous guest speaker come in. And this author, therapist, trainer, Richard Schwartz came in. I'd never heard of this person. And thank goodness he happened to come in my last week of work there, because it changed the course of my life and my clinical practice, and also now this restorative approach. So at the end of our time together, I went up to him and I said, Dick, I want to write about restorative practice and your model. Well, 17 years later, I'm at his workshop at his international conference, and I watched him do a demonstration interview with someone in front of a crowd of 100 and some people. And it was a long interview, and it was a tough interview. And the workshop was on shame. And I said, Dick, I drew this little square for him on a piece of yellow paper. And I said, that's what you look like you were doing. Like you were, you had limits and high expectations, and you were also very caring. And he said, he pointed to that quadrant. He said, that's the self. So I want to share with you, my framework is that we can, when we apply these restorative principles to our internal world, and what we do is when we have parts, the angry part, the guy who says, San Francisco, you ruined pizza. When we have that kind of thing come up in us, it's not to neglect it. It's not to punish it. It's not to say, I'm going to give in to you and act out on this. If we can bring that sense of understanding and nurture and limit setting, then we're doing things with those internal aspects of ourselves. And that brings about this experience of self. And I want to describe that experience that I think, if you can identify with this, that you probably have been here. Because this is born into each of us across cultures around the world, according to Dr. Schwartz. What he says is that when we have this experience that he calls self with a capital S, we are in a place of naturally being compassionate. And just a little segment here, compassion, I think, is an antidote to burnout because it's different than empathy. And we could talk more about that at some point. Compassion is going alongside someone in their suffering. It's not taking it on. We're in a place of curiosity. I wonder when I acted so harshly toward my son, what was going on with me? Oh, I know what was going on with me. It was fear that he would grow up and think he doesn't have limits and get to a job where his employer is like, no, you're not the boss. Or being curious about that part, the fear that my daughter, for example, in this one scene, was going to have her voice overridden by my son because he was louder and more forceful. So those fears emanated with me yelling at my son. There's courage. So even the courage to stay with it. My son exhibited courage that day because after a while of shutting down, as I was shutting down, he let me sit next to him. And he also reached across the table to my daughter and said, I'm sorry for what happened before. Clarity, so we can see, we can view, we can experience a sense of knowing what to do. Calm, being creative, being confident, and being connected. Again, that antidote to disconnection. So when we are able to access this self, and there's many, many more hours of conversation, training, and experience around this. It's just an introduction today. Then we can be what Dr. Schwartz says is the eye in a storm, that even in turbulent times, even in an actual hurricane, there's an eye in the storm, and that eye is a place of calm. And we certainly have enough turbulence. So here are my three R's of restorative practice. And this bridges off of Bessel van der Kolk's idea that we need to add a fourth R to our school, our educational system, which typically is known by reading, writing, and arithmetic. He says we need to add that fourth R, which is regulation, which is self-regulation. It's being in that place where I can acknowledge those parts of me that are coming up without them taking over. So when we're in that place as a provider, and I have reactions in working with clients that I can get frustrated. I can so desire to be helpful, and the other person is not in a place where they're ready to hear or take in input from myself or even from other members of the group that I lead or my co-therapist. Well, I have to acknowledge that part so that it doesn't interfere with that client's part. We're going to be better at relationship when we're self-regulated. We're going to increase our capacity to respond. I translate responsibility this way because I don't really understand take responsibility. What I do understand is that when we are in that place of self-regulation, we are moving from reactive based on my needs, my frustrations, my lack of fulfillment of needs, to paying attention to the other person and responding to their needs and saying, if I've harmed you, how have I harmed you? What can I do to help you? And in the same way, I learned many years ago during an introduction to a speech, this word respect. And it's hyphenated to emphasize that respect is about looking again, to re-spectacle. And the best example that I can give you comes from my kids when they were max 3 and 4 years old. And when we harmed on each other, I would adapt. What I'm going to show you in a little bit are these restorative questions that come from a friend of mine, retired police officer in Australia, who brought the formal, these practices go back to indigenous communities around the world. He brought over some formal questions, and I adapted those for a 3 and a 4-year-old. So here's what happened. My son did something to my daughter. They're about a year apart. So I'm sitting on the floor with them. And we had done this so many times. All I had to do was prompt and ask my son how. And he said, how you feel, sissy? And she said, sad. And she hung her head. And I said, how? And he said, how can I help you? And this is what she said. Just look at me. That was it. She didn't say give him a timeout, even though we probably didn't use timeout at that point. She didn't say punish him, let me hit him. She just said, just look at me. And now she's 14, so she denies any big meaning in this. The meaning I give to it is, I'm your sister. You can't hurt me like that. I'm a human being. That's respect. And I think if we can find ways to get underneath behavior, yes, limits on behavior, limits on violence, all those things are super important. And then finding that safe space to have conversation and to listen to what's going on underneath. The behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. So those are my restorative practice 3 R's or so. So if we can make room for these various aspects of ourself, the contradictory aspects of ourself, as what Walt Whitman says, and we can actually align with how we are wired, which is to feel more good, feel less bad, less of the negative, and we can listen and acknowledge those negative emotions and stories. If we can affirm the positive, because even though I might feel okay about something I'm doing, and I don't get positive feedback about that, it's not a necessity. It sure is nice to hear, wow, I got something from that. Nice job. Appreciate what you shared. If we can affirm that, and if we can promote that sense of safety and welcome for all of those internal experiences, no matter what they are, including hatred. Hatred is an emotion, in my view. It's not behavior. It gets turned into behavior. I think the more important part is actually to find out the stories behind why someone has been hating someone. What's the wounding underneath that? If we can do basically just those three things, listen, acknowledge, affirm, and promote that welcoming environment, we will have better lives. That's how we build community. So a particular practice that helps people to live within systems, to live within communities and organizations, that's also about that idea of welcoming, comes out of the Harvard Business Review. This topic is called fair process. So you think about this in terms of running an agency, for example, or making any decision. That typically people are more likely to trust and cooperate freely with systems, whether winning or losing by those systems, when fair process is observed. The story about this comes out of a situations described in this article in January of 2003, where a woman was given a ticket for parking where she shouldn't have been parking, except there was no sign. So she went to court, she brought a picture, and the judge said, yeah, of course, no, you're free to go, ma'am. But she wasn't satisfied. Even though she won, she wanted to tell her story. That storytelling, that connection is vital to doing things with others and that cooperation we're talking about. So here's a brief overview. So we talked about kind of being in that place of calm and curiosity and confidence and courage. And when we're clear about what's going on inside, then we're more in a place to decide what kind of practice, what kind of intervention do I want to use to support others in healing, in relationship building. And this is, again, something that's kind of a whole workshop. We'll talk about these affective statements, which I'll show you in a moment, and questions. An affective statement would be, I'm noticing that I'm feeling frustrated right now, and it's based on my desire to have things go better for us. Would you be willing to engage in conversation? That's kind of a combination of a statement and a question. A circle. There are many types of circles, which I'll list in just a moment. And then finally, a formal conference. I'm not suggesting anyone goes out and does this, but with training and time and safety, people can be brought together to resolve harm. And this has been, a formal conference has been held ranging from a murder where people got together, even in a prison. And there's a documentary made about this in Australia, to watch the transformation of those who've been survivors come through that conference in healing ways, as two of the four men involved in a robbery that became a murder situation also were in that meeting and helping in that process. It's been used in sex abuse and incest situations, or situation that I was involved in outside of OMH. So these are pretty intense processes. Again, it's just to kind of lay out the continuum of what we can do on an individual basis all the way through when people come together for healing. So here's a card that is one side of a card that I used to carry around in my wallet, which is why it's frayed on the edges. And these are those questions that my friend Terry O'Connell brought over from Australia. And these are questions that I think are rooted in how to approach things these days, which is when something happens, a child acts out in a certain way, we're trying to get away from saying, why did you do that? For one, the why question, remember that point of things happen for many reasons? Well, it may be that the kid had a rough night sleeping. It may be that the kid is dealing with a divorce that happened 5 years ago. It may be that something happened overnight that is now affecting their behavior. So rather than the why question, it's what happened. This is a format for helping someone share their story. The questions I adapted for my kids were, we eventually added what happened as they got older, to how did you feel, the impact, and how can I help you, which is what to happen to make things right. So this is just one example about how to help people when they've been harmed. It's really the structure for a conversation. And then the circle process. Circles can be used as a check-in at the beginning of a treatment review, for example. at the beginning of a classroom situation. Let's just check in with those parts of us that are coming up right now. What's on top? What are we bringing today? Well, part of me is distracted, and I was doing a class for my son's career day recently, and one of the things that came up is one of the girls in the 7th grade class was like, "Yeah, I don't want to be in school." I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, so tell me about that." And I think she was saying that she really wanted to leave and, not be in school. And I said, "Well, that's interesting because I noticed that that's a part of you. And at the same time, you're sitting here. So what's going on that you're sitting here?" Well, she probably doesn't want to get in trouble with her parents. But just knowing that and acknowledging the experience, that just might help her system to be more self-regulated, because then maybe she's not so focused. She's acknowledged, first of all, that that's an okay part that doesn't want to be there that day. Maybe some of you have experienced part of you that doesn't want to be somewhere, and yet you do it anyways. That's an example of kind of just getting people settled and acknowledging parts. It can be used as a goal setting framework. What would we like to accomplish today? It can be used in instruction. I have some things to offer. Let's have a reflection time on that. Community building, many, many examples and questions that can be used in a circle format to help people start small and safe as possible ways to connect with others. There's a problem-solving technique that is a little complicated. I finally think I got it, called the fishbowl. And this can be done with huge groups of people and a very small circle to have a person bring a problem in that they're looking for input on, and acknowledging everyone's voice and healing, as I mentioned, and finally a checkout. So, and even after a child, for example, let's say they're going to the hospital and now they're back in school or back in the family, how do we reintegrate that child, even if they're sick for a day? After an incident that happened, how do we debrief? And again, those questions I think can be used as a basis for those things. How are people affected? What needs to happen to make things right? It's not about blame. It's really focused on somehow the community has been affected and somehow this person or persons have been affected. Let's listen to that and make room for that and acknowledge the positive, that the person is able to come back and wants to come back to the community. So all of this, probably wondering, why the heck do we have an alligator and a turtle on a log? Well, I actually had to purchase this photograph off the internet because years ago, when I actually had photographed exactly the same from a nature preserve, I lost the camera. I said to the tour guide, "How does that happen?" And she said something so poignant. She said, "We feed them well." Imagine that. What if we fed ourselves and each other well? That maybe we could do, as Chilean biologist Humberto Maturana says, which is to open space for the other. He defines that as love. Love is opening space for the existence of another. We see this in the external world. We see this in relationships. I'm also putting forth the idea that when we open space in ourselves for even those parts of us that we disdain at first, even those parts of us that we don't understand, if we open space for all of it, we open space for our best self to come forward. So how does all this tie into hopefully changing the world? Well, when we share affect, when we use that with rather than to and for social discipline window, we engage in the fair process and use these practices, we strengthen relationships, we build bonds, we build that sense of belonging so that I don't want to harm someone else because I don't want to be cut off from the herd, which is a whole nother workshop on shame. But that's the worst thing that could happen, is we do need each other and we don't want to be cut off. And when we're in that place of greater belonging and togetherness and connectedness, maybe we start advocating for changes in our social determinants of health in schools, in our criminal justice and court systems, and our child protective systems and our housing. So that's the root of community health and well-being is that some of these practices may help us get to these larger goals in our society. So I'll just finish quickly by saying that, again, thanks to all of you as taxpayers in the state, and thanks to our leadership at Office of Mental Health, I can provide these kind of services, understanding what people's needs are and tailoring to your community to try to be helpful, to provide introductory webinars like this and some other topics, and also to consult, be behind the scenes to support you through a phone call or through an email. Feel free at any point to reach out and to talk about, does this thing make sense to how to handle this situation? Or, gosh, this was coming up for me. Is there something in what you're talking about, Jon, that you might help me to kind of better understand myself even? Separate from therapy, a brief conversation, if that's helpful, I'm glad to do that. And here are just some examples of some other kind of more specific frameworks. So again, donning our own mask, it's going to be a bumpy ride, as we know. Effective leadership, delving a little bit more into some of these topics. And then I've started to work with a couple of agencies where they want to incorporate these practices in their whole agency. So that's all on the table. And I'm going to come back to this slide about what's been interesting, what's come up for you that you might want to share. Are there ways to partner together in a checkout debrief circle? But just prior to that, I want to invite Rae to take over the hosting for just a moment and to share a 4-minute video. Now, I'll say that this can activate a lot of emotion, so feel free to turn it off or to mute it. It's about refugees, and it's about how they have navigated through some of those negative experiences, and welcome to all. So, Rae, I'm going to make you the host again.
Okay, thank you, Jon. I'm going to share this out.
Yep, I can't hear you too well, Rae, but hopefully it'll be okay.
Turn the volume up and we're going to start this.
Okay.
I'm gonna make the decision to pause this now, John. Apparently we're having a lot of trouble hearing it. People can see it, but they can't hear it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm
Okay.
gonna send the link out after the presentation. My volume is on 100%, so this may be our technological difficulty for the day. Sorry, folks. We'll send that out with the slides and everything from today's presentation. And I'll turn it back over to you, John, if you've got more slides that you'd like to share.
Okay, and even though you couldn't hear the sound, the facial expressions of that are very poignant and I think fit into this idea of welcoming all. And it's also just a reminder, as you see it later, we have what we need. It's just a matter of accessing it. So I'm going to put my contact information up here. And also, Rae, if you want to open up the lines to invite people to share what's come up for them on terms of being on top or anything that resonates, things that don't make sense. This is welcoming all of your parts today too.
I'm going to take over as host, John. So we're going to table your screen share.
Okay, sure.
And I'm going to say, you know, we've done so much better with the technology this time around, but it seems to have been a struggle for this whole presentation. So when I open up the chat, it may in fact lose everybody. If I lose folks, you've got the information here from John. It will get sent out to everybody attending today, and this will be posted on our website as well. So we didn't want to get in the way of the message that was being sent today, which I think is really powerful. And I want to thank John for his time. So John, if you can hand it over to me to be the host.
Oh, sure.
That would be great.
Yes. And you know, the Q&A was actually working.
I see that.
So that,
yeah.
So that might be a way for people to comment.
We're going to see if we can open up this chat. While I'm working on it, I want to thank everybody for their time today, for their patience. And I appreciate it. And I am absolutely struggling to make the chat happen. So I think with 2 minutes left to go, I'm going to turn it back over to John to share any final words. And then, you know, I'm fully aware this would have been better in person if we could have done it. It would have been better interactive if we could do it. But I appreciate everybody taking the time today to come and listen to the words. And if there's follow-up, you've got my information and you've got John's information.
Yes. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, for listening to me. Again, so much of this is kind of putting some thoughts out there and ideas and then hearing back from people. You know, what do you think of this? Does it make sense? Is this stuff that you think you can apply in your own life? If we had more time, I could give you other examples of the way that this has influenced my life and my family's life. So I try to use these principles. Even this evening, I'll be doing a therapy group with my co-therapist of 26 or 27 years. And we were chatting earlier and she was sharing her reaction towards someone and, you know, just acknowledging that. And tonight we're working with someone who I'm going to talk hopefully more about these protective aspects of the person that are getting in the way of what the person really wants. And that's, again, building on this idea that we all have these parts of us, and acknowledging them is just, to me, so important. I want space for those aspects of myself. I want space for all of you. And through this, we'll make a better world. And as consultant Peter Block once asked, who wants to change the world? Well, I'm going to raise my hand. And how do we do that? Well, we do it one room at a time. The other question is which room, and that would be the one that we're in. So thank you for joining this room today together. And thank you, Rae, again, for all of your kindness and flexibility and working together. And to all of you for what you do every day in support of families and yourselves out there. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks, folks. Have a wonderful day.